either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And we are at the end of year 5, finally. We unintentionally also finish off with another religious film, as you guys have already known.
Yeah, I don't know how we accidentally did this one, because this one was very blatant.
Very blatant, but I think I chose it because I still wanted to continue from what we had talked about and not do like a Russian film, but do something not on the super high end of like the artsy-fartsy side.
Totally understandable.
So, to end season 5, we are doing 2014's Calvary.
A very good movie. Yes. I had not seen this movie, I think, since it came out, and I was very pleased to revisit it. It is honestly a much better second watch.
Yeah, well, first off, big shout out to my buddy Actuality on this. He's the guy who introduced me to this movie, so without him, we would have done something else. But yeah, he introduced me to it, and I was just floored by how well it was written, and like, it's not preachy.
No, this is a fantastic, rounding out of the themes that we have been talking about.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't go silly like Monty Python.
No, this one is unfortunately the opposite of silly.
It's got humor. It's a comedy.
It has some dark humor. And I mean, a lot of the comedy comes from the writer, McDonough. Like, his style. And even he talked about it in some of his interviews where he goes, well, I just got done making a film that was much more lighthearted and I thought I needed something a little darker. Yeah. And, I mean, he succeeded. Yeah,
it's a comedy in how In Bruges is a comedy.
Sure.
Where you bring that up to people and they're like, that's not a comedy at all.
Yeah, the overarching themes are not comedic, but the characters do have their moments.
Yeah. So for those unfamiliar about why this movie is a little dark, Calvary follows a priest who is told by one of his community that he will kill him in a week because he's a good man.
Yes. This came out in 2014, and it happened the story is based around just a few years prior. There was a big stir-up in the Catholic Church specifically, a lot of people coming forward about sexual assault that happened to them as children, between them and priests, and it caused a big stir, because for a long time, this was something that was unspoken, but understood, and a lot of it brushed under the rug. And finally people were coming forward with not just accusations, but proof, getting people actually in trouble, people being removed from the church, removed from priesthood, because of this. And so this takes a very serious time in the Catholic faith, and also in a very serious setting. This is set in Ireland, in a smaller village in Ireland, who predominantly are very Catholic.
Yeah, or at least attending Catholics.
Yes. So this was a very interesting look into all that, because a lot of the times when we see movies that are trying to tackle those themes, they come at them without, honestly, a compassion side for the church. This movie does a fantastic job of putting our main character as the compassionate, good priest. And he has to deal with a lot of shit.
Yeah, he does. So, Calvary is written and directed by John Michael McDonough. It stars Brendan Gleeson, which I think this is like the 3rd or 4th movie we've covered with him in it.
That's true, yeah.
Chris O'Dowd and Kelly Riley.
Mm-hmm.
And for those like myself who are unfamiliar with that term, Calvary is the hill outside of Jerusalem where Jesus was killed.
I'm so glad you Googled that. I was wondering if you would catch it.
No.
Okay. There is a lot of very, blatant Catholic themes in this that, if you don't get it, you'll be fine. However, there is a heavy correlation between our main character and the love and sacrifice that Jesus was supposed to have made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on this one, we have no research, really. The special features was just at least I don't have any.
I know you don't. I went frickin' digging this afternoon because I needed a small break from work. I had a very infuriating call that I just needed a moment. So I took 30 minutes and I found a few interviews that I added on top of the very limited DVD extra stuff. Vanity Fair did an interview with Chris O'Dowd, and then the interview with Michael McDonough and Brendan Gleeson on DP/30. That is honestly the best one. That's where I'm going to be pulling a lot of my quotes and knowledge about the background part, because they did talk quite a bit, not just about this movie, but their relationship together. They've worked together on several films, and they talk extensively about McDonagh's writing style, directing style, along with Gleason's acting style.
And I know we're probably going to get bitched at for some of the names.
I will.
think it's McDonough.
It might be. I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
I know I watched an interview where they talked extensively about each other, to each other. I was doing good to follow what was happening. Everyone on the interview had an Irish accent, except for the Vanity Fair interview. And honestly, that one I watched mostly for the shits and giggles, but Vanity Fair interviews are very hit or miss. This one was a miss. So.
All right. Before we get into it, Chris, what are we drinking today?
We have beer. They don't have a lot of drinking options in this. And so today...
Beer, whiskey, wine, and water.
Yeah, those were our options, and we went with good old fridge beer, which feels appropriate.
Yeah. The Moosehead from My Bloody Valentine.
You know what? It fits.
Cheers.
Cheers. Still delicious.
Very good. So, Calvary opens with a quote, "Do not despair, one of the thieves was saved. Do not presume, one of the thieves was damned," by St. Augustine.
Yes.
And we cut quickly to a pastor receiving confession and his death sentence.
This is a really cool opening scene, I'm not gonna lie.
It is. Well, I like it in a couple factors. One, it sets up the mystery of it because it's a just straight on shot of Father James in, I don't know what the term for the confession booth is.
A confession booth is a perfectly acceptable term.
Well, the priest portion of it.
Yes, it's fine, don't worry about it.
Where we're revealed that, hey, this guy's been sexually abused by a priest, at first at 7 and every other week for 5 years. It gets really heavy, but it's also lightened with the fact that the priest is the comedic relief, weirdly enough. Because there's a couple opening lines where when it's revealed that he was raped, he's like, well, that's certainly a startling opening line. And it's just like, okay, he's kind of disassociating himself a little bit. And we see that as it continues on because Father James, while trying to be compassionate, also tries to delegate or push off the heaviness and the issues that are going on with the church to, this isn't me, so why don't you go seek professionals?
Yes, I do think that they did a very good job of writing Father James as less of a stereotype and more of a realistic character. The advice that he gives throughout the whole movie, and like from the beginning, like you see that his advice is not the stereotypical movie advice that a father in a very dramatic confessional would normally give. Instead, he's like, well, here, you should see someone more inclined to help than I can help.
Yeah, psychologically help you. And the guy's even like, the perpetrator. He's very much so like, oh, why? Because I can relive that? I've already done that. I mean, it's not going to fix me now. I mean, I've got other stuff to deal with.
Yeah.
And then it's also revealed that he's going to kill him because you've done nothing wrong. Very poetic in the fact that the children who were molested by these men had done nothing wrong.
Sure. And I think this is also, again, the movie does a very strong job of trying to tie Father James to being as Christ-like as he can be. Innocent lamb to the slaughter. It is not a hard jump to make.
I wouldn't even say he's 100% innocent, just like...
He's not, but that's where the writing of Father James is smart. Because they could have very easily written him as 100% innocent, like the perfect lamb. However, if they had done that, they would have missed a lot of opportunity, which they did use, for having a more realistic interpretation of, like, the shepherd that leads the flock, which is a theme that's very heavily explored for the rest of this movie, because while this death sentence is very, like, upsetting and spooky, and clearly, like, the main theme, this is not the only problem in Father James's life, as we will see.
No, not at all. But it's a quick setup that he's relatively, in some regards, helpless and useless.
Yes, true. We'll get to more of, like, why later. Yeah.
But we also, cut from here, get really pretty shots of Ireland and the title card.
Honestly, this movie is very pretty.
Oh, yeah.
In general.
There's a lot of, like, really artsy shots that kind of makes me think a little bit of, like, Braveheart or any...
Honestly, most Irish countryside.
Irish, Scottish, English countryside movies.
I will say, I was surprised because when I remember watching this, not, like, right when it first came out, but, like, I had a movie buff friend. They thought this movie was the bee's knees. And I remember watching this and not realizing that it was a smaller budget movie. Because honestly, a lot of the filmography looks really spectacular. Like, everything's shot really pretty. The way everything's framed really does a good job of showing it off. Nothing feels too overly cliche.
Yeah. I mean, it's just an example that you don't need high budgets to make pretty movies.
Definitely.
From that opening scene, we're contrasted with the confession and facing his parishioners, which I think is a very smart choice to, like, start trying to build up the mystery of, like, hey, here's these people, but they're all people that we will eventually see later on in the movie.
It's not a whodunit, it's a who gonna do it.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's how, in the one interviews on the DVD, that's how they brought it up, too. Which I appreciate, as someone who doesn't really like the Agatha Christie whodunit format.
Yeah, this is a nice, interesting way of turning it on its head.
But I will say one thing that I noticed after having watched this multiple times is that the true suspect doesn't pause for the amen. He just says it real quick. There's not really, like, any breath between him saying the body of Christ. Everyone else, there's like that. It's a very small fraction of, like, a moment pause.
I mean, like, once you've watched this a few times, there's not, like, the big twist turn that a lot of, like, honestly, mystery films that make you very upset, where, like, you really can't figure out who done it. If you wanted to, you could sleuth your way through this one if you really felt like it, but you would be missing the point, I think. Yeah,
and it also does a good job of bringing up that initial tension, as after the confession he confronts the altar boy in a very close room, which was the issue that the person who's going to kill him would put him in. But it's also just to make us feel more comfortable with Father James, that he's very compassionate, he's a little snarky.
Very trustworthy of a man.
Yeah,
no, I think the build-up and the initial grounding of Father James's character is very important, because it is something that honestly does not evolve throughout the movie. Father James is our constant.
He does change. I will say he does change.
A little bit.
Because from what I remember, I think they said that the movie was kind of trying to go through, like, the 7 stages of grief.
They mentioned that, but I do appreciate Gleason's interpretation of it. He talked about, in one of the interviews I watched, how he really appreciates the director writing style, where there's not a lot of dialogue for the actors to try and mess with, where he felt like other directors leave the dialogue almost unfinished, and thus you get a weak movie, but where he felt that there was room for him as an actor to come and interpret with was the underlying reasons behind said dialogue. And so he mentioned several times how this overarching concept of the great virtues, and how he thinks Father Brown, or not Father Brown, wrong movie. How Father James would have been trying to very actively live each one of those. And also they do tie together with the stages of grief and depression, having those parallels run throughout the undercourse of the movie.
Yeah, for me it was a little hard to, like, try and pick up exactly where the transitions were, who was supposed to represent what. I agree. I don't think that but I do appreciate the attempt at some overarching, like, because even if it's not the main focus of the story, having those themes even visible at all, I think did help a lot of people who watched this movie without the same lens that the writer and the actors originally saw it through, added another, like, understanding. Well, I think what it also does is it creates a leveling or a layering of the movie that's not super cliche of, like, oh, this person represents this sin, this person represents this stage. They're all kind of blended in this manner that it makes it hard to figure out which part of the stages of grief Father James is supposed to quote-unquote be in. No, I agree, and I also think it adds another layer of interest to the characters, because honestly, everyone in this village has, like, honestly the worst life. Like, nobody in here is happy and no one is thriving. No. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because immediately from there we go to post-mass with what I'll call the shitty priest, because he's just talking about how, like, oh, can you imagine, all these confessions are just so depressing, it brings it all down. It's like, geez, man, you're here to help. Oh, yeah, well, and it also is a way to show that of the 2 priests here that this guy could have killed, this guy is the one who's most out of touch with his flock as well. Yeah, that's true. At least in comparison to James, because although there's not a lot of reaction from James in this scene, he still is like, well, I guess I should go and talk to... There's a woman who's wearing sunglasses because she's got a black eye.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no subtlety in this movie, which it does work because everyone's so over the top, but not in the same way as, like, a very theatric. It's very drama-based. Like, a lot of this could have been on TV, and I would have bought it.
Yeah. Well, and also it's to actually show that there is a bit, like, while he's not reacting, we can obviously put that to shock. But Father James is actually caring for his flock. He's not just some guy that is there to take care of the church and whenever people need him there. He's active in his community. It's starting to build up that he is a good man.
The stink of the sheep on the shepherd.
What?
Is when you're a leader in the church and you are so involved in the problems of your people and trying to help them that, like a shepherd would stink of the smell of his sheep when trying to help them.
Oh.
You are not this beautiful angelic picture that grandmas have hanging in their kitchens of Jesus with his cute little staff and his cute little curls and his cute little baby lamb. No, you were gross because you cared for your sheep.
More Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah, but less desert drugs?
Yeah.
That man could not have just been sitting in the desert doing nothing, we all know.
I don't know. I mean, when you're...
What else are you going to be doing out there?
Well, actually, that's a good question. I don't... Because, yeah, the Jedis are very priest-like. I mean,
yeah, there's definitely supposed to be some correlations. But, I don't know. I don't think all of the details were thought out at the time of Obi-Wan's introduction.
he's supposed to be celibate, too, so...
As far as we know.
I mean, he's the true Jedi. It's not Anakin who gives into his
Well, of
lustful
course
desires.
it's not Anakin. Look at him. Look at the child.
Yeah.
We fucked up from the beginning.
True. But we also have a little bit... I mean, he doesn't fully go to the talk with anyone. He's just kind of walking around town, waiting for bedtime.
Yeah, I know.
We have the little bit with the dog that was supposed to have a little care about it, but I really don't.
It was rather brief, which is upsetting because, like, later it is played off of more. But, yeah.
It's not like in Audition.
True.
Where the dog gets a little bit too much a heavy emphasis. But that's my theory in, like, horror films. If there's too much emphasis on the dog dies.
But if there's not enough emphasis on the dog will die.
Maybe. I don't know.
Warning, the dog dies.
Yes. But he goes to tell the deacon or cardinal, or I don't know the Catholic Church, so I don't know what this half cape wearing dude's supposed to be.
Yeah, just, his manager.
Yeah, I mean, technically it is his manager. Maybe he's like 5 steps below the Pope. I don't fucking know.
He's not 5 steps below the Pope. Yeah, his priest manager. That's fine.
Sure.
That's fine.
But it's also to show that his higher-ups are useless, just how much, like, the church was useless to the suspect.
Yes.
He's an innocent man seeking help, and there's no one there to do it.
And now you can see very clearly where the previous real-life accusations influenced this film.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. And it's a brief scene before we're off to pick up his daughter from the train, which, again, bringing up the comedy of it, too, where...
Priest with a daughter.
Well, priest with a daughter, and also making light of suicide, or attempted suicide. Don't tell me you made the classic mistake.
Yeah. No, this movie does do a good job of trying, like... Because, again, everyone in this village is miserable. So having at least a little bit of, like, dark humor or play off of that misery is needed. Otherwise, this movie would be so depressing, no one would watch it.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it's still a pretty emotionless movie, really through a good chunk of it, too. Like, it's...
Yes, but I also think a lot of that is because while we are getting a very brief taste into Father James's life, he has been doing this for a while now. He has been this like, terrible places, like, honestly, counselor for a way long time.
Yeah, I think there's a line later on where, I can't remember, some character is talking to his daughter, and he's like, oh yeah, your father, not a bad word about him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's a good man.
Yes.
Which, we quickly go to the bar, because of course it's Ireland, they're gonna go to a bar, and we get one of my favorite characters in this movie, Milo.
Yes.
Who's immediately hitting on his daughter.
Yep.
And
straight out the gate.
Yeah, and Dr. Frank, who we find out is kind of an asshole, making some snide jokes of, God, what's the line? Milo says something along the lines of, like, I didn't know that priests could have kids. And Frank's like, it's apparently so. It's like it's that level of comedy where it's just a very subtle, simple line that's very natural in the way it's addressed.
Yes, and honestly, the writing's some of the best stuff in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
All of the dialogue is written very smartly. Everything's delivered very nicely. It really adds to the movie because you don't feel like anything's out of place.
No. But it also shows that Father James is at times is a little closed off from his congregation because they didn't know he had a daughter.
That's true. That's true.
And also it might show that none of them really pried. He's just that figure that is kind of in their life. They don't ever ask about him.
I was gonna say, it's always, how am I doing, never how are you doing, sort of thing.
Exactly. And we also get a little bit that he's had alcohol problems in the past, which a good way to set up something that comes down the line of he doesn't drink anymore, or if he does, it's very, very minimally.
True. I also think, though, that, like, these two big character flaws or quote-unquote character flaws for Father James is what really changes and defines him from being just, like, honestly a pretty forgettable fill-in character, which a lot of, like, Catholic priests or nuns or what have you has been watered down so much, because it's an easy character to add into almost, at this point, any genre you can think of.
Seen many nun movies where they get filled in.
Mm-hmm, yeah, I figured this was where that was going. But, like, having him have, honestly, we're told fairly early on, like, hey, not a traditional priest, and also this is why he advises his flock in somewhat unusual ways, like advising, maybe you need help that I can't give you. You need, like, someone with a PhD.
Yeah, it's a good way of setting him up as not necessarily a broken character like some of the other characters we see in this movie, but a flawed character.
And an understanding. Like, when he says, like, oh, I understand what you're going through, here are the tips that I'm giving you, or here is just the listening ear and understanding, it is coming from someone who is not better than thou.
No, exactly. And even then, with his daughter, there's no real dialogue between them, other than him just holding her hand.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a very somber scene. But it's short, like, a lot of the scenes in this movie are very short.
That's true.
But they build up, because from here we go on to the beaten woman, Teresa, which he still makes jokes at the horrible things.
Yeah, like, it's clearly his way of coping.
Yeah, his way of dealing with, like, hey, I have to see and handle these horrible things.
Yeah, my 2:30 appointment is, domestic violence.
Yeah. And, I mean, she's also on the same level as him. That's the other thing is, like, he's not the smartest man in the room.
True.
Everyone's kind of on the same level as him, but he's a little bit too witty, I'd say, because she does say the line of, you're just a little too sharp for this parish. Whereas, like, someone like the other priest would have just let things go. It's like, okay, they've confessed, I'm gonna move on with my day.
Yeah, it also adds to the whodunit or who gonna do it of the movie, because honestly, even though his life has been, threatened, and it is the main driver of the movie, he is not super interested in, like, Sherlock Holmesing his way around town. He's really more like, well, I've already got a booked schedule for this week, so let me finish that out. But while I'm at it, you, the audience, are going to have this point of view of, like, okay, I need to be the one to solve this for him.
Well, that's exactly how it is set up, because when he goes to talk to the deacon, he knows who it is. I mean, he clearly knows who it's going to be.
Yeah, no.
It's just us trying to figure out, well, which one of it is. If you watch closely, it's
clear.
It's very clear.
But it is another one of those instances where this is one of those movies that does reward a second or even a third watch, but not in the way of, like, oh, you're going to catch something in the background, or, oh, there's just so much happening or so much dialogue. It's more of like, well, now you know where to look for what. Yeah,
no, exactly. It's not like, back to your goddamn Murder on the Orient Express.
I knew it was coming.
She had a southern, eastern, this specific tiny little town in Germany accent. It's like, how the fuck am I supposed to know that?
Yeah, no. But at the same time, I appreciate that where this movie very could have easily leaned so much more into the, like, oh, you need to figure out who did it for any sort of reward. The movie just is like, alright, if you were paying attention, you should be caught up.
Yep. And from here we go on to her husband, who's the butcher of the town, which I love the interactions because, and just the comedy of this scene too, because he is the most lighthearted character that I think we'll meet for the most part.
True.
Minus, oh god, what's his name? Jack or something? The policeman's gay lover.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He's like, oh, you gotta talk to me, sounds ominous. And then they go meet in the freezer, and he's like, we'll have to make love to keep warm. Which everyone, like we talked about, everyone in this movie is sinful or fucked up in some way or another.
True. Part of the reason why his comedy is honestly so on par is because that's what he's known for, is comedy. He's not traditionally just like straightforward an actor. He is a comedian first. I believe this is Chris.
Yes, this is Chris O'Dowd. For those unfamiliar, if you've heard the famous lines from IT Crowd, have you tried turning it off and turning it on again?
Yes.
That is him.
Yeah, his comedy is delightful, and honestly, even though he is, in his interview with Vanity Fair, he says that this was not supposed to be him in a comedic role, he just is a comedian, and it follows him around. And so despite that interview being honestly trash, it was interesting to hear that he thought he had toned himself down quite a lot for this role.
No. Well, I don't...
I do think, especially having seen some of his stand-up, I do think that this is toned down by his standards. And his lines are not something that he wrote. Again, like, John has always been very adamant about, like, no, I thought very long and hard about what the character says. You say the line I wrote. How you say it, that's up to you. Mm-hmm. But, like, I did write this whole script. It is done.
Yeah, no, I mean, it works well. I mean, when we speak of the comedy, he's there to confront him about the beating, which this is where we also find out that she's got a boyfriend or other lovers outside of her husband.
Yep, and she has a side piece.
Well, and on top of that, Simon's the lover. Mm-hmm. Our friend here isn't, like, upset about it. He's like, yeah, she gets to go out, I get to live my life, I get to do whatever I want. Mm-hmm. But you know what? I don't know, she's either bipolar or lactose intolerant. I don't know, one of the two.
Yeah, those things are so similar.
Yeah, but that's where the comedy comes from, and also his lack of giving a shit about the situation. The
pastor's here, like, alright, I hear you out, but, like, your hand did meet her face. Like, we seem to be having different conversations.
Well, he's like, no, it wasn't me.
Yeah.
Might have been Simon.
So, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but it also, there's some humbling in this scene, too. Maybe not humbling is the right word. Mm-hmm. But there's a line where not everyone can carry the weight of the world, which is said in a comedic way, but also hits a little bit heavy that...
It sure does, especially because, like, we're barely into Father James's, like, everyday life, and it's already like, wow, this is a lot. And, like, we haven't even seen everybody yet. We haven't even met everybody.
This is day 2.
This is day 2.
It's a Monday.
Man, this man's Mondays are rough.
Well, hey, he has a day of rest, and then he has to go to work.
I guess, but I don't think he really gets a day of rest.
No. But from this, we are on to Simon, the boyfriend, which they do a good job in building the tension between the two. Mm-hmm. Specifically in the fact that, Simon is like, yeah, I mean, she wants it. Like, sometimes she wants a good hitting. And it's like, we're reading it as abuse because we know it is later on, but also kind of playing into that maybe they're a little bit kinky in their sex life, and the father doesn't particularly want to know this, but they do a couple cool things in this scene.
Yes.
There's an early use of the Dutch angle, which usually the Dutch angle kind of annoys me at times because I think it's a little overused.
Yeah.
But the way they use it in this scene is to build the tension of shifting who's taller in the conversation.
I agree.
Instead of just like, oh no, kind of like film noir style use of it, of tension building. Until they're eventually on equal ground. And even then, Simon tries making it a race thing. And the father just shuts it down real quick. He's like, that has nothing to do with this. Don't even go down that road. There's a woman who's been beaten, and I'll get to the bottom of this with my actually, he's kind of like Scooby-Doo a little bit. He's got a dog.
No, he is a little bit like Scooby-Doo, and also in the same way of, like, how he is solving the troubles of his flock. Mm-hmm. Because, like, because he, I think it was when he was talking to his bishop was like, hey, sounds like you maybe need to involve the police. And he's like, but that would be breaking my oath. Mm-hmm. I can't do that. That would be too far, but I can help them.
Kind of, yeah.
And, like, so, like, that honestly is, like, a huge driving motive fact, like, on why we are confronting the potential abusing husband and the boyfriend, as opposed to just talking to the wife and be like, all right, check that off my to-do list.
Or like, hey, who did this? Because
Exactly.
she doesn't even reveal who did it to her.
No, but, like, he very well could have felt like he had fulfilled his obligation by just coming and checking on her and been like, if you need anything, honey, you know where to find me.
No.
Like, that would have, a lot of TV show fathers would have considered that check mark done.
Yeah, I talked to her.
She seemed fine, sort of thing.
And then the next day, she's dead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, like, you can tell that, like, in his own way, he is Scooby-Dooing it.
Well, it's a good way to bring it up, too, because in the next scene, we get back with the shitty father who's just like, why did you go talk to her? Like, I mean, there are certain ethical issues we can't involve ourselves in. And it just shows, like, why people do like Father James, despite him being a little bit nosy.
True.
Compared to this other guy who, honestly, we only ever see him interact in the bar or with Father James.
That's true. I also think that his, like, full character role really helps solidify something that the director wanted to embed into this movie, is he knew that he was placing his movie not just, like, from a history point on a difficult point in the Catholic faith, but also in a different time when it was, like, coming out, and location, because in one of his interviews he talks about how, like, this village would have been rocked by the news. Like, they would not have not heard. However, they would need this level of faith. They have always lived with this level of security and community and reliance on their father.
Mm-hmm.
And Father James being the one to step up and, like, handle that when he has this clear counterpoint who's more of the, like, quote-unquote modern idea of what the church could be, where he's trying to hold this, like, idea of community pillar and faith and trust.
Yeah, and in regards to a fatherly role, it makes me think of, like, the stereotype of the, like, a little bit overly involved dad compared to, like, the very laid back of, oh, they're fine. They'll sort it out themselves.
As they're actively beating each other on the ground, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
exactly.
This is a very good comparison.
Yeah, but from here we're introduced to an old writer who's...
I love this man.
Yeah, he is very... What's his name? I know he's in Harry Potter. We are wrong. Emmett Walsh is not in Harry Potter.
He just looks vaguely like Filch.
He's Harvin Critters, that's who he is.
Yes, that's it.
Oh, and he's Mr. Profok in Knives Out.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
But no, I love... Because he's supposed to be a depressed American writer staying in the village for a quote-unquote inspiration. Mm-hmm. And this man seems the opposite of inspired.
I wouldn't even say, like, he's not staying for an extended period of time. He lives here.
Oh.
Like, this guy's lived here for forever.
No. When I say he's staying, I say it in the same way that an eccentric person who has been living in, like, Paris for 20 years is like, I'm staying in Paris for my art. And you're like, no, you are now Parisian. You've been here long enough.
Yeah, you've lived here half a decade.
Yeah, I think you can just say you live here now.
Yeah. Well, it's also an interesting thing, too, because it does show that Father James also is not just involved in domestic issues. Mm-hmm. He's actively looking to make sure that, hey, this old man is being taken care of. I think they mentioned that he has, like, a maid who comes over every now and then, but, like... Yeah,
but, like, that's not a lot of human interaction for a very depressed person.
No, not at all. Because, yeah, he's asking if he can get him anything else, and he asks for a gun, specifically James Bond or Hitler's gun.
Yeah, I do appreciate that how both of, like, this seems like a running tradition between the two of them. Like, this is a problem that they have talked about before. This is why Father James is even here in the first place, to be like, I'm here to make sure that you have eaten this week.
Yeah, but it's also... and it's easy to write it off as that, but I think what the scene also does is it starts to give Father James a little potential for a way out, because he uses this opportunity to ask where he can get a gun.
That's true. I do think that you can, as the movie progresses up until kind of a climax point coming up, you can start to very subtly, especially when he is not directly talking to one of the people of the village, start to see that this little bit of anxiety about what he had been told earlier. Like, he's been trying pretty well to not have it bother him, clearly. But, like, he just got told he was going to be murdered later this week. Like, that would be upsetting regardless of your beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And I mean, it's human nature to want to survive and
Sure.
find ways to protect yourself. So, again, we're starting to see, like, maybe it's, what part of grief? Bargaining, maybe?
Yeah, maybe bargaining.
I don't know the stages, so... But yeah, it's a start of, like, Father James being a little more active in trying to solve his upcoming issue that's happening in less than a week.
It also makes sure that you know that while Father James's character is very much meant to be based off of the most human, idealistic version of someone trying to be Christ-like, he is not a perfect character. He has not already thought up how he is going to end this problem coming up. He's still trying to figure out what he's going to do.
Exactly. And we get a little bit of padding where his daughter visits his house, or his abode, his room, not even his house.
Yeah, poor guy.
Minimal life, no photos, which is a very...
It is interesting, because it does feel like he has cleansed himself of his past.
To a point, because even though she's like, well, don't you, not even a photo of mom, and she's like, I don't need a photograph to remember your mother. It's like... Which
is sweet, but also you can feel that, like, somewhere he maybe regrets it just a little bit. Because it is a common thing to have this, like, want to purge after you feel like you've had something terrible. And, like, maybe he also feels guilty because of the alcoholism that he mentioned earlier. So, like, having that idea of this big purge, and I mean, he went pretty extreme. He went all the way to the church.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, especially compared to the American side of religious movies we've seen, because we obviously know something happened with the wife, and potentially he went to booze, but then he went to the church. He didn't become a staunch atheist.
That's true. And I do also like that it is a forever kind of blurred line of, like, when did the problems with his wife and her death and also the alcoholism, how all of that plays, and then this abrupt change to the cloth, to the religious faith. And you can also tell that, like, while he does not regret becoming what he now is, he does seem to have a little bit of regret of, like, that transition period. That, like, well, maybe I mean, I'm glad I'm here, but I didn't do it the right way.
Yeah, I think it's more so, you can see the inklings that maybe he feels bad that he abandoned his daughter, or quote-unquote abandoned. I feel from the narrative that maybe she was an adult.
Still, but, I mean, like, it does, the way that the narrative puts it, it does kind of seem like freshly mom is dead, and even if you're an adult, like, having your mom die, and your dad just being like, peace, I'm joining the brotherhood.
Yeah. Well, and we see this this is really the part where we see him opening up a little bit. Now that we're past the shock of being told he's going to be killed in a week.
True.
Get a little bit more. And then they also run into Michael Fitzgerald, who's living the high life, showing his own wealth.
He's the most cynical, I think, in the whole movie. And I do enjoy his character. He does put a lot of balance, I think, into this overly religious film. His whole role is to make sure that, like, the questions that a cynical audience member has, someone in the movie has room to, like, question out loud. Yeah,
played by Dylan Moran of Shaun of the Dead fame.
Of course.
But it also is a way to make a little commentary on how this man is just as detached from the church because of his wealth, where he's like, oh, you know what, I could build you a house over by me so I could have you on speed dial of whenever I need to talk to someone. Again, showing that he's lonely, like, building up the layers of this other side character, but also he's like, you know, how much money would it take? I mean, the Catholic Church has a desire for wealth, don't they? How much gold do they've got?
That's true, and I also appreciate that, like, there is literally no happy people in this movie, and that includes the person who on the outside seems to have it all figured out. Like, he has a lot of money, he seems to be doing really well, he claims to be a little lonely, but, like, it's not that bad, I can come into town if I really wanted to.
Yeah, but I think it's clever writing in the fact that he's saying, hey, it's his way of reaching out for help of, like, I could build you something closer to me if you want.
That's true. And, like, it's not necessarily... Like, it is definitely something that, like, if the characters, honestly, were not dead soon, would have more time to, like, deliberate on. Like, it is one of those talking points that you can see that Father James has maybe talked with him about in the past of, like, I know that you don't come to church often, maybe, like, twice a year, but, like, you know, you do have potentially to do a lot of good.
Yeah.
You have a lot of money, and this is not a thriving village.
No, exactly. We cut from this to the visit to the inspector and his lover, Leo, which I also like the scene, too, because he's clearly uncomfortable, but it isn't because they're gay. Yeah. Leo's just a grating prick.
Yes, 100%. And I appreciate that this movie's very blunt with it. Like, they acknowledge whatever, like, running question you might have. Like, the racism brought up earlier was a great example of, like, I know you, audience. I know that you're going to see this character, you're going to see this actor, and you're going to think, oh, there's some underlying bit here. We're going to squash that. We have a dialogue. We have a, like, story to tell. Focus on the story.
Yeah, well, it's there, but it's also carried on throughout because Milo later on says a line of, you never know what a Muslim's thinking.
True, yeah.
So there is that underlying current of racism here and there. I think he's also racist towards the Romani people in one of the bar
honestly,
scenes.
It seems like just about everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just Milo, I guess.
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
But also the scene is revealing that, hey, some people have darker secrets, even though they joke about it, where the inspector's like, oh yeah, this gun's only been fired once. I could use it to kill a man in the mountains.
Yeah, and like he says it so casually.
Yeah, which you don't know whether he's joking or if he's being serious of like, yeah, just heads up.
If you, I was gonna say, like, if you run this in the police files, will it come up with, like, murder weapon wanted?
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's also, that's clever in the writing too, is because they take that and carry it into telling him the reason why he's getting the gun. So that way, in case anyone asks, why does this priest carry a gun in this small Irish town? That's
very true, especially when it's, from the outside, a fairly happy community. It's just the only reason we know everyone is unhappy is because we were following around the only man people tell.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also, at the same time, the cop is just as uncomfortable around the priest.
True.
Because it feels like he at one point was that goody two-shoes, not to the extreme of Wicker Man level, but where
he wanted to do good.
But also at the same time, he's kind of betrayed his own beliefs where, granted, if we're going like super Catholic, the fact that he's gay is a big no-no.
That's true. And like this movie, while being incredibly Catholic, it doesn't necessarily harp on like the like deep beliefs of Catholicism. It's mostly a lot of just common sense, like, don't kill people. Yeah. Don't beat up people.
Yeah, it's no Wicker Man being tempted by the vile heathens.
Yeah, no, like, temptation is not the problem in this movie. It is the act of being an asshole.
Yeah, no, well, and that's the fact is that everyone else in this movie has given into the temptations. They're not living the quote-unquote pure Catholic life.
Sure. Well, I think that also adds to, honestly, the drama of this film, because just, like, confessing that you had been tempted, while interesting and maybe good for daytime TV, this whole town is dealing with just, honestly, an onslaught of problems. And so having, like, if you did have one character who's like, well, I've only been tempted. Well, it sucks to suck, lady.
It makes me think of that. There's a TikTok that keeps popping around of some dude on, I can't remember. It's one of the fasting days where he's like, how's it going, brother? Oh, I fell in a shawarma, accidentally fell in my mouth.
Oh, for Ramadan?
Yeah, Ramadan, that's what it was. I didn't know which one it was, so it was just kind of funny to see.
Oh man, I hate when Schwartzes just fall in your mouth.
And a little bit of water, and an apple slice.
Oh, dang it.
Yeah, but again, it's building up all these characters, and they do a great job because this is only Monday.
That's true. It does feel like a very long day.
I mean, it is.
But, like, it does a really good job of, like, portraying it, like, in the sense of, like, passage of time. Like, it doesn't feel like an overly long, like, movie-long day where, like, we've gotten more done in a day that's physically possible. But it also does feel like a long enough day to warrant a good drink if we were drinkers.
Yeah, but it also is the one part where, like, we've been introduced to all the players now. It's done its job, and now we carry on to Tuesday.
That's true.
Where the father is fishing and still pushing his problems off to other people because his daughter's obviously asking for help, but he's like, I'm not a psychologist. If you want, I can probably recommend you someone.
Yeah, and I do sympathize with both of these characters here, because it's very clear that she is not looking for a psychiatrist. She is looking for a dad.
Yeah.
And he is tired of being everyone's dad.
I mean, it's the profession he chose.
It is, and I totally get it, but, like, both of these characters are equally frustrated.
Yeah.
And they do a good job of, like, portraying it.
Yeah, which is a great pairing because the next scene, we have Milo confessing to him that... Not even confessing to him.
He just, like, straight up tells him.
Well, they're just chilling in the church. They're not even in a confessional booth. He's just like, I'm either thinking of committing suicide or joining the army, and it's all because he's bored and he can't get laid.
Yeah. I love that the father's advice is, well, have you tried porn? Which is not necessarily something that a man of the church would normally suggest, but this is a man who has seen the world.
Yeah, and Milo's response is, yeah, I'm into tranny porn, chicks with dicks, man.
Yeah, it's like, alright, well, we are in the house of God, keep it down.
Not even that, it's just like, Milo just doesn't give a shit at all.
He really doesn't.
But it's also him trying to convince him not to go through with one way or the other. He's like, go on vacation. He's like, where? To Dublin? He's like, no, Paris or New York or something.
Yeah, get out of the country for a bit. See something new.
Yeah, and his response is, most likely if I went to New York, I'd get AIDS. But there's also a good bit in this, too, where they're talking about killing. Which
That's true. They talk about it a lot.
Keep coming back to that theme of what this movie is going to be about is the morality of the church in their responsibility, or the responsibility of other people's actions within an organization.
True, and also, I think this movie does a great job of lightening the idea of death until it actually happens to someone you care about. Because that is kind of the whole point of the killer's motive, right? Because he talks about how, if I killed a bad priest, nobody would be upset. In fact, they'd probably be like, oh good, one less one. But if I kill a good priest, people will weep. Yeah,
well, also, here's the thing I just thought of. Up until now, his future killer probably didn't realize he had a daughter.
That's true. But
yeah.
That's true.
But, again, back to this scene. I think what they do well is they go through this juxtaposition of him buying a gun and him quoting to this guy who's thinking of offing himself, "Thou shalt not kill."
True.
And, more so about his wanting to join the army in peacetime.
Yeah.
But then he turns it back on him. Well, what about in self-defense? And he's like, well, that is a tricky situation, sir.
Yes, and I do appreciate how the movie, it acknowledges some of the talking points that after, like, the aftermath of the accusations on the Catholic Church, right after that happened, there was a big wave, and it didn't just hit people in the Catholic faith. I remember this happening with my Lutheran friends and even my Methodist friends and Baptist friends. We all had kind of this long talk and discussion that happened for like almost a year after these accusations on not just like how terrible the accusations were or how terrible the acts were, because for a lot of these people, like, these were not accusations, these were proof. But also, like, it all of this happened right after a wave of, honestly, a lot of it got rolled back, a lot of it got taken back by our most current pope on some ideas of what the interpretations had been saying that others were not a fan of, like self-defense, or military, or gay love, like, a lot of accusations that this movie touches on without necessarily blatantly saying one way or another, like, what the standing that they're going to take with it is. And I like that because it does acknowledge, for a lot of people, this was like a very, like, this moment in the church's history stands out, like, very heavily. Like, a lot of people will remember this time very strongly, and they're, like, those concepts and discussions that we had around that time also stand out. And so having the movie even, like, touch on them in any way, even if it's done in dark humor, even if it's necessarily, like, a little dated at times, or done in a way that, like, maybe it makes light of it, maybe it doesn't, having it even discussed makes this movie feel much more realistic. Like,
it feels like you watch old movies where they touch on, like, teen pregnancy, where it's like, hush, hush, you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And this one, they're very open about exploring the different walks of life of people who still consider themselves of the faith.
Sure. It'd be like having a movie that had a portion talking about 9/11, and then no one talked about what it was like to travel afterwards, the anxiety people had about even getting in cars, or taking the train. Like, if you had a movie that briefly touched on that topic, and then, like, no one had any, like, national level anxiety, it would have been weird, right? Is a similar, like, concept of, like, these two things were linked so heavily in that time period, in that, like, group, in that discussion, that it would have been strange for this movie to just ignore those topics entirely.
Okay, yeah, something dealing with reality compared to something like the Satanic Panic.
Exactly, where, like, yeah, it happened, but, like, depending on where you were, the details were different.
The details were very skewed.
Exactly,
Yeah.
whereas this one, like, this was, I mean, it was a global-wide topic that people were heavily debating, and, like, these are all, honestly, still topics that the church, every couple years, either a different pope or new, like, someone, like, demands, we need answers, we need to know, and so someone has to say.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite Billy Talent songs, Devlin in a Midnight Mass, is about this stuff.
Exactly. So I really appreciate the realism that a lot of the topics bring to the characters, because honestly, this whole village is so over the top that it would be kind of like almost murder mystery, where it's like they're more characters than people if there wasn't these discussions happening.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. I don't consider this town over the top, per se.
The amount of just so much happening, it was supposed to be a very quiet, very small village. Like, we're talking like 50 people.
Yeah, I mean, you can have...
I know you can. I'm just saying that for a movie, we went heavy.
Yeah.
We went in hard.
Yeah, I can see it. And it's one of those ones where it covers a bunch of different topics, but it does it well because the viewpoint is from a single vision.
Exactly.
Not scattered through like 20 different side stories that are supposed to try and tie into each other.
Exactly. It's the topics that tie everyone together, not necessarily the acts that are happening.
Exactly. Because from here we're on to Fitzgerald, where...
Oh, yes.
Rich, powerful, but alone. So drunk and dumb, but I do like his thoughts.
I do too.
He's an interesting man, and they clearly show his character as he is so concerned about appearances. Again, good in the writing here, because we've talked about he's the one who's supposed to be happy on the outside, but clearly he's miserable.
Yes.
He's projecting his outward concerns onto the father's old watch, where he's like, I could give you my watch. This watch is really expensive and fancy. If you want it, I've got 20 other ones.
Yeah, he's very much the like, oh, well, because I look this certain way, because I own possessions, that has solved my problems. When in reality, he is just as sad as everyone else.
No, exactly. And it's another scene where it turns it back to Father James, where he's like, how much does the church own? That's the church, not me. Constant reflection of, like, he's like, hey, this isn't my problems. All these things you're concerned about that are going on with the church, this isn't me. I'm here for you guys, not to answer your questions about the church.
I also appreciate how this really does focus the audience's attention in on the problems of the parish that Father James is having to deal with, as opposed to critiquing Father James, thus the church, on its own. Because, like, that would have been an easy topic. Again, like, that was a big topic during the time when this was supposed to be set. Instead, we're like, no. We could talk about that, but that's too much. We only have a week before everyone dies. Like, focus in. We gotta be focused on the actual topic here.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because, I mean, the scene ends with him trying to pretend, or Fitzgerald trying to pretend that none of this matters to him, and that he's just there because, hey, I'm doing my... I asked you up here so I can still kind of be a good Catholic. Yeah. But you know what? All this stuff doesn't matter to me. What do you think? What do you think I care about if I piss on this painting? It means nothing to me. I told you it was my favorite. I don't care. Yeah, he's just at this point just showing off for no one. Yeah, for himself, really. Yeah, he's one of those pompous rich kids that you hear about on like Facebook stories and bullshit. Sure. Oh yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, but it's all. I do think it's also a kind of comedic scene because he drops trout in front of a pastor. Yeah, in front of the pastor. Yeah, and pisses on the painting, and it's a fun shot too because it's like below him, underneath his legs, and you just see the stream drop, and and Father James is just like, "You're beyond help, man." Yeah, he's like, "I'm going home. Yeah. You call me when you're feeling better." Exactly. But now he's actually on to do some good work at a hospital with a dead Frenchman in an accident, which. We get the heartless Dr. Hart judging the lives of others like he's better than them. Yeah, and it is a good, like, way of bringing another, like, audience perspective in without having this character need to be recurring too much. You know, having this morality to, honestly, a murder mystery characters, which, again, like, those characters, generally speaking, very easy to just kill off, because they're not really human. Yeah. Whereas this movie makes everyone feel much more human by having these offshoot characters who can bring in, like, an audience's questions. Well, it also kind of makes you forget that this guy's gonna die in a month. This is a murder mystery that we're trying to do, because we're introducing all these characters, but we can't, there's no real
There's no solidity to it, because we've already been told the ending.
Well, there's no animosity or, well, scratch that. There is. There is a subtle animosity from one character.
Yeah.
But all the other characters are just kind of dicks, and it's not like they're trying to...
and it's not directed necessarily at him.
Yeah.
He just has to deal with them.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's also a way to show that Father James cares for all, even strangers. He's actually a truly compassionate man.
True. And, like, him and his interaction with the grieving widow is really a touching scene, and, like, him agreeing to even come and read last rites to a man that he does not know, who's not part of his church.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter to him. Like, clearly the widow or the hospital called up the only person that they could find. They're like, we got a guy, his wife says that they want this, like, I don't know, you come fix it.
Yeah.
And he's like, yep, I'll be there.
Yeah, well, it's also an interesting way to parallel him and Dr. Hart, who are supposed to be in relatively similar professions where they're supposed to be helping people, and Dr. Hart has the same dark comedy of, like, when he's like, oh, well, there's someone else I gotta go in and kill.
Yeah, they both have a similar experience with the world. It's just Dr. Hart has let it jade him.
Yes.
Whereas Father James has definitely spent a good portion of his, priesthood trying to embody forgiveness and mercy.
Yeah, Father Hart, if he wasn't Irish Catholic, if he was on the American side of, like, if this movie was made, he'd be the super devout atheist character, one of them. Oh,
for sure. And I do appreciate that, like, everyone's just kind of, like, thrown in the same pot together, because it does leave, honestly, better dialogue. Because, yeah, like, this poor doctor, like, he's not, at no point is he wrong in his scene. But he handles himself so poorly. His bedside is so terrible.
Yeah.
But at no point is he wrong enough for you to be like, wow, how unrealistic. No doctor ever has ever said that to anyone.
No, I've been around a handful of doctors, and some of them are abrasive, and they have that kind of God complex.
Yeah, like, he is a realistic character, but he's in it for such a short amount of time that I don't have to worry about this, like, honestly, a battle between these two characters.
Yeah, and it's also... It's an interesting scene to bring up or to put in it, because Dr. Hart is someone who's seen death on a daily basis.
Sure.
The widow is now facing death, which is a little bit of that, like, foreshadowing of, like, or premonition for Father James of what's to come, of, like, what he'll have to potentially deal with, or someone else will have to deal with about him.
Yes. I do appreciate that, like, this movie takes death and shows that it does not just affect the one character who has died, and it's not just a clue or a mystery for someone to solve. This is going to affect someone in his life, and we've now met who it's going to affect in his life.
Oh yeah, no, exactly. And from here we get a dream of him with every single man, like, in... I like the way they shoot this, because no one is clearly seen as who's going to be the killer.
Yeah, it's very, like, I don't know, it's a good use of dream.
Yeah, they're all pointing guns at him. It's to show his mental state of that, hey, this is kind of becoming real to him, of, like, he's
getting paranoid.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it could interfere with his promise to love and protect.
It's also to throw us off as an audience a little bit, because even if you're like, okay, this is definitely the guy, it's like, well, you know what, maybe it's not now. If the pastor's dreaming of, like, it's one of these 5 men.
Yeah. Well, and it also, like, helps you as the audience think back on all of the experiences we just had, and think back to, like, if you have someone in your mind that you're like, oh, that could be him, and you get a moment to think back and be like, oh, well, that guy did say that one line, it's pretty bold. Oh, he's crazy enough to do this, or, to be in this sort of mental state. Yeah, maybe he would be crazy enough to kill a man for no reason.
And I mean, it's an interesting comparison too, because we talk about death at this part, and we get his daughter's confession, where this is the part where she really opens up to him initially, where she's talks that her death would be insignificant in the grand scheme of things, and his response is, every death has a meaning.
Yeah.
Again, foreshadowing what's to come. But it
is interesting, though, that he says that to her in a pastor way as opposed to a father way. Because you can tell that she's kind of hoping that he'd be like, no, it would impact me. I would be upset. Yes, I am your dad.
Yes and no, because for this, I feel he's opening up in the confession. But only because his responses are more so from a member of the church response.
Yes.
Instead of an
it
actual...
feels professional in a way.
Yeah, no. Well, also at the same time still being... trying to be the father.
Yeah.
Yeah, just hearkening back and repeating the theme from the scene before of what's gonna hurt is not you, but the people who are left behind because of your actions.
Exactly.
Which, I mean, we've had a handful of people wanting to off themselves in this movie already.
Again, I even though it is harsh, the added talk of death that everyone in this movie has brought, whether that be a joking suicidal person or, you know, this weird love triangle thing happening where it's like, well, you know, now that you know that so-and-so's in your eyes a bad person, would it be so terrible if, you know, she died, or if this person died, or if this person went missing? Would it really be so bad?
Yeah. Well, and again, building up the comedy of it, because from this scene we go to meet the writer in a graveyard of all places.
He's so dramatic. I love him.
Oh yeah, he's like, is this where you want to be buried? He's like, no, why'd I be buried in a shithole like this?
Yeah, despite having lived here for 10 years.
Yeah, and even the father putting in his own little joke of like, you might take a pot shot at me, even though he clearly knows it's not this man.
Yeah.
A fun attempt to maybe try and mislead, but it's a scene that's kind of giving contemplate the meaning or the reason to kill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And again, the pacing of the scene and how they stitch things together, like it is a bunch of little side stories, like Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Sure.
But because we have that one viewpoint that's stitching them all together, it's interesting.
I agree. It doesn't feel like little skits, it just feels like little pieces of a story. Yes,
minus, in my opinion, this next scene, where he has to go visit a serial killer, and I think part of my reason is, I don't think this adds too much to the movie in comparison to the other characters. Maybe to show that he's willing to go out for even what's supposed to be one of the most evil people he's come across.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Because the director talked several times in the side interview that I watched about how, to him, even though he knows other people have seen this movie and come away with some different interpretations, like having the different stages of grief, or trying to find deadly sins scattered throughout, that sort of stuff, to him, this movie is solely about the depths that forgiveness can go to.
Yeah.
And he's not upset, like, in his interview he talks about how he's not upset that other people got different, like, endings or understandings from it, because he says in his mind, if you've created good art, other people will bring their experiences and put it on your art and see it differently. And that's how you know you've made something good. But he's like, to me, I have never seen anyone else's interpretation. It doesn't make sense to me, because to me, I think it's very obvious and very clear that mercy and forgiveness is the entire theme of this movie, the entire point of everything that he does. And so, like, I get why this scene is in. I do think it's a little strange, because, like, it feels like we already had pretty bad stuff happening in our village, and we needed something even more extreme to prove that Father Brown is ready to go the lengths to forgive even more, to be that next Christ-like figure.
Yeah, but I also think, now that you put it in that perspective, maybe this scene isn't as less meaningful as I thought, because it also shows that maybe the people in the village aren't as bad as we've put them out to be compared to this one guy.
Well, and it is interesting, because I do appreciate that we really only see, I think the guy's name's like Freddie Joyce or something like that.
Yeah.
And he's supposed to be a cannibal, too.
Yeah,
So he's, like, supposed to be, like, the worst of the worst.
And one of people who used to be part of their community and flock.
Yeah, and like, it's interesting, because in his dialogue, he never, like, actually says, I'm sorry for what I've done. He never says he feels bad about killing people. He just says, I would like forgiveness.
Yeah, I'll go up and make sure that they all are happy up in heaven when I see them.
Yeah, and, like, a rational person would say, I don't know if you're going to heaven. You did eat them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there's a circle in hell for cannibals who murder their victims.
Well, and
Hannibal Lecter's not going to heaven.
He's also seeking, and the father doesn't even, like, really fully forgive him.
No, but I like that, because it's like we're building to that ability, right?
Yeah, because it also, at the same point, feels like a test to him, where it's a parallel to the church of, he killed all these young, innocent girls,
I'm so glad you said the word test for Father, because I do think that this is another section where, like, if you are in the Catholic drama, the bit where you would have recognized the name of this movie and known it for what it is, as opposed to Bunch of Men on Horseback, you would probably recognize this as supposed to be the parallel of before Jesus was sent to be crucified, before Judas sold him away. He was in the desert and the devil came to him and tempted him. And this is 100% meant to be, like, a parallel to that, of, like, one of the temptations that the devil came and, like, offered Jesus, like, you are a thirsty man living in the desert out here. Have a little bit of bread, have a little bit of water, I can make it all go away. And Jesus is like, no, my people need me. And once again, we see how this is very clever. Like, you don't need that to get to the same understanding of what Father's doing. But having that knowledge, it's nice to be able to say, like, aha, very clever. Very sneaky. Well written.
Yeah, no, again, just the level of cleverness this movie puts into it. Because, I mean, immediately we go back to the town where everyone's like, why did you go see this guy? Like, what was the point? You should be considered a little, or care for us a little bit more here, because the pub owner is confessing of the foreclosure and the sins of the bank's greed, which, nice little nod to the church's greed in the past.
Sure. Again, another metaphor that we could run with the whole Jesus theme going. I love it.
Yeah, he can't escape being a confidant. He just visited a serial killer and
he comes back and he's like, boy, I just would like to sit down with a nice cold glass of Diet Coke. And they're like, no, the bar's going under.
No, he drinks a hard one.
I know he does. Yeah. But, like, the him reintroducing to alcohol does feel like a little bit of him admitting that, like, man, this is we're having a rough week, guys.
Yeah, it's like he's finally admitting, like, the reality of the situation, too.
Yeah.
Also, Milo's back in the scene, and he's just very awkwardly standing there. He can't approach anyone. He's like, I don't like this music. I can't dance.
Just hanging out.
Yeah. We also get a little bit that the butcher's wife, Teresa, is maybe a little bit involved with the doctor.
Oh, again, more scandal.
Yeah.
And honestly, now that we've seen a cannibal who thinks he's going to heaven, honestly, a lot of these scandals don't feel important anymore.
No, I mean, she's texting Simon, we've seen it, but the butcher obviously is clearly not happy with the situation, even though he told Father James that he was.
That's true. I do find it a little interesting that they chose this actor to be the butcher, because he normally plays very comedic roles. It's what I'm used to seeing him in. And so having him play, honestly, a more serious, like, he has a few jabs. He has a few good, like, little dark humors, but, like, normally he's, like, a full-on comedic person. And so having him in this role of, like, God damn it, woman, like, is kind of jarring.
Well, it's not even like, God damn it, woman, he's just, like, sitting in the back gritting his teeth.
Yeah, he looks very upset in most of the scenes that he's in this movie. But, like, it's not like they dressed him up to look different. They just put a butcher apron on him.
He's a cuckold who didn't want to be a cuckold.
Yes. And it's very strange to see him in this way, but he does a great job. Like, I'm fully invested, but he's one of those actors that, because I recognize him so easily from his comedic roles. Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, honestly, a lot of the other actors, including Gleason, who, like, he's a very recognizable face, but he has the ability to shift just enough that I do forget who he is, right? Like, he becomes the character for me, and I'm happy with it.
Yeah.
This guy, however, I'm like, what? What are you doing here? What are you doing?
It's kind of like he's typecast a little bit.
Just a little bit, and it's nice to see him break out. I think he did a really great job, but it is kind of interesting that maybe we need different hair for next time or something, because we know that will definitely confuse me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get what you're saying. And also, the scene does a good job of building the tension with the music in the background that finally gets Milo dancing.
That's true.
Maybe a little bit of liquid courage there.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it's a scene that shows that Father James might be a little bit of a joke to his flock at times.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how they lay all this really heavy knowledge and secrets, essentially, on him, and then kind of just, like, ignore him the rest of the time.
Yeah.
They're like, oh man, doesn't everything suck? Anyway, do.
Yeah, Teresa's constantly asking or trying to get him to go into temptation.
Yeah, but it's in such a joking manner that it's like, she definitely means it.
Yeah.
But she's doing it in this, like, I know he'll say no sort of way. Like, she knows it's safe to do this and, like, act this way, because she knows that nothing will happen.
Exactly. But amidst all this merriment, it's time for the church burning.
I do like the escalation that this movie has, because even though we've already met, honestly, what's supposed to be, like, the worst of the worst, a cannibal murderer on death row.
Yeah.
We need to continue the escalation.
Well, because it has to get worse for Father James, because he's the only one who really seems distraught. His daughter is there for him, but...
Well, it's not her church, it's not really her town. She's here to visit him.
No, exactly. This is basically his home at this point.
No, it 100% is. Look at his little tiny-ass loft. This man lives 90% of his day in that church, or the bar.
Yeah. I mean, it's also... It's a very intense scene. It's a very beautifully shot scene, too, where...
It is.
The town kind of gathers around, but none of them really try and do anything. Like,
but, like, what can you do?
Well, you can try and comfort him instead of, like, sitting there gleefully smiling at the church burning.
There's definitely a few pyro people in the audience, but it is awful that no one thinks of him in this moment, but I do feel like it adds a layer of realism to them, because I do think the ones that are, not clearly, like, a pyromaniac, because there's definitely a few of them who are just over here like, tee, get the marshmallows.
Yeah.
The ones that aren't, it's almost like they don't think it's real. Like, it's so in shock that their church is burning that, like, it hasn't even occurred to them that, like, it's burning. It's gonna be gone.
No, exactly. And even then, the scene right after, it's comedic, where the lines go, who would do a thing like this? Someone with a grudge against the church, obviously. That's like, half the country.
Which, I mean, is a very good line, and very aware of the time period and the placement of this movie. And again, like I said before, I really appreciate that we are acknowledging when this movie is supposed to happen, because it does make this movie feel much more real, despite us now having met a cannibal murderer and our church catching fire. All kind of in the same weekend.
Well, I think this is Wednesday.
Yeah, because he only gets like a week, doesn't he?
Yeah, Sunday to Sunday.
Sunday to Sunday. This is the worst week of any man's life.
We're halfway through it.
Oh, man. It makes me feel really good about my week.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it's interesting, too, because we go from this right to the beach and Veronica swimming. Really pretty shots.
That's beautiful.
But this whole scene is to further install that she's bringing up the point to the father that you shouldn't write off people with problems to begin with. No one is a lost cause.
True. Which
kind of ties into what he's going through as well, is that maybe he's not a lost cause. Maybe the person who's wanting to kill him, maybe they can turn the tables.
True. Yeah. No. I agree that it turns, and it doesn't just turn his mind, it turns the audience's mind away from preventing and more of finding meaning in these terrible things.
Oh yeah, no, exactly. But I mean, from this we quickly go back to the Abbott dude for a little bit with, they know he's wanting to protect his flock and that, hey, you're describing the killer. We know it. We know exactly who it is at this point.
Yeah.
But we go from here to Fitzgerald, who's now wanting to donate to the cause,
Yeah, he's seen the light, teehee.
Solve his money with his problems. He's like, this is the way I can solve it. But it also is still showing, like, his wealth with his pen of like, oh, by the way, this is how much this pen cost. And the father really pushes his resolve with his money of like, if you really care that much, then why not this much?
Yeah.
Well, why not this much? Well, why not?
Yeah, I do think it's a good way of, like, not just brushing aside this idea of, like, oh, well, I have found a very obvious use for my money. Because let's be truthful, he could have donated this at any point.
He has to show a face of doing it instead of trying to donate it anonymously, because they would have known who it was.
Or even just donating a large amount every year, because clearly he's not. No. He's not been donating to the church, even though he admits to having an abundance of wealth. Now that the church is burned down and he can have a placard with his name on it that says, funding by.
Yeah.
Now he's putting down the pen to the checkbook. And it's this display of turning a new leaf. And I like that the father character calls him out on it. He's like, you haven't really turned a new leaf. I'm not going to tell you no. If you want to write a check, you write a check. But no one is fooled.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's also a little bit of a change in Father James, where
he feels more jaded, doesn't he?
A little jaded / I think things are becoming real, and this is the first time he's truly felt attacked by his flock.
Yeah, and also, it very much feels less of like, oh, well, if you kill me, I guess make it fast. This now feels like you're torturing.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not what we agreed on last Sunday.
Yeah, no, it's just it's pulling at the last strings that he's got.
Yeah.
But, and even here, we quickly go back to lunch with Veronica, or lunch with his daughter, and Veronica's taunting. She's just grating at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's really more to show the bond between James and Fiona, his daughter, and how they've somewhat grown better. Like, James feels like he's grown closer to his daughter, I think, in this visit, and I don't think she does.
Yeah, his patience versus her lack of patience with people taunting him.
Yeah.
And they go on a little walk, encouraging his daughter to get it all out. Reveals that he failed her when he went to be a man of the cloth, which, like I said again, I appreciate this movie heavily for his wife died because of cancer, and it's not why God, it's God was his foundation for that, and he still loved regardless.
Yeah, and I also appreciate that this movie does a really great job of showing that, like, even though he's in the right place now, him getting there hurt his daughter. Like, she needed him to be there, and he said, nope, peace out.
Yeah, I don't think she says it in a cliche manner of I lost 2 parents that day.
Yeah, no, it all feels like a very, like, good, and like, at no point does this, like, sad walk make the audience feel like, man, I feel like I'm at I don't need any more explanation. No, you feel very much like, okay, we're finally at a pinnacle where we can both forgive and move forward together, sort of thing.
No, exactly. And we get a little bit with the author who's going to bed on booze and meds. What a way to age.
I love this man, because he's also the most dramatic person, because he just says, I'm going to bed on booze and meds, and you're like, okay, so like ibuprofen, acid, what are we doing here?
It just is old man meds.
It's just old man meds. It's probably like vitamins,
yeah.
like
probably, or some medication.
Yeah, like it's just old man pills.
Yeah, but it's a short-lived scene as the father gets back and finds his dog dead, which is sad, but not a lot of focus on it. Like it's like trying to push him further. It feels like the killer's trying to push him.
It does. I do think that for an audience, this doesn't feel as important because we really only got like the little brief scene at the beginning with the dog, as opposed to having the dog follow him places, or be seen as like coming with him to church or something. Like, it's not his constant companion, at least as far as we, the audience, know.
Yeah, the son loving the beagle in Audition.
Yeah, or, where the Redfords grow, where, like, the dog and the boy are inseparable, and it's just heartbreaking. The book I'm on in Dungeon Crawler Carl, they bring up that movie, which I haven't seen. I actually didn't know the story of it at all. I think I have it on VHS if you want to borrow it. The original one, the heartbreaking one.
Probably. They cliff noted it in Dungeon Crawler Carl. So.
I've been iterated the whole thing. But I think this scene was kind of meant to hit double points as like, oh man, his dog and also, but instead of the and also, it's just the also, where he's trying to hide the death of the dog from his daughter by burying it while she's not looking.
Yeah, and
it's more of him protecting her as opposed to, like, him losing the dog.
No, exactly. And even then, it's a scene for him to, like, the last little bit, I think, that was keeping him. If the dog had been a little bit more focused, maybe it would feel like it was the last bit that was tying him to this area. It
would have been his confidant, I think, would have been a nice way of, like, having the dog's character be, where, like, who does the father confess to if not his dog?
That's exactly what I was thinking too, is like that dog would have been like his companion, not even because he had to confess to the dog, because the dog didn't confess to him. It's the only person that that loved him unconditionally without needing something else.
Sure, but again, like, this movie's already plenty long, the pacing's already very good. I'm not, like, devastated that the dog is, like, a missed opportunity. It's just kind of one of those, like, oh man, the dog, dang it.
Yeah, because we quickly go to his daughter, or him taking his daughter to the train station, and just they're kind of like their quick goodbye, and then he meets a little girl who's kind of lost in the countryside, which is a nice touch of, even though we know it's clearly defined that Father James is a good man.
It's another point.
Yeah, mistrust of what were you talking to her about?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, nothing. Sure it wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's another ability to see it from the villagers' point of view, from like the rest of the world in this movie's point of view.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a breaking point too, even though it's not like well displayed that it's a breaking point for him, because it's that last straw of like even strangers don't trust a man of the cloth anymore.
Yeah, no, it is a good like point to bring up, especially considering like the entire atmosphere so far has been solely in this village.
Yeah. Well, because he goes from here to drinking, and they're all just taunting him, being assholes to him.
That's true, yeah. No, like, nobody's nice to their pastor.
Yeah, and if you haven't caught on, the killer drops a line in here where he's like, "Are you sure? Because I've been having doubts myself." Which is part of his opening dialogue.
Yeah, no, like, it's again, this movie's not sneaky about the whodunit, but it's enough of a whirlwind. We're all emotionally exhausted at this point.
No, well, it's also fun too because it's like it's the way, compared to the way the others are taunting him, where they're just like, haha, you believe in this. He's giving him an inside joke that no one else is in on besides those two and us.
That's true.
Yeah, and also the greaser guy is kind of a dickhead again, Gus or whatever his name was.
Yeah.
They also call out his hypocrisy of he's not willing to take orders, but he's willing to give them out.
True, yeah. It's all, like, well thought out hypocrisy, as opposed to just having, like the other movie we watched a while ago, where literally the background audience is just yelling, boo, you stink!
Yeah.
Like, this is all, like, well thought out insults, so it does feel like another opportunity to be, like, for an audience, like, here's all of my qualms, and the writer can narrow it down and be like, yes, I see them, but we do have an impending deadline to hit. Yeah,
well, even though like the gay lover is grating, he does serve an important commentary point where he's like, oh yeah, I've served many of your kind before.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, well, it doesn't extend just past that. Even the priests are hypocrites of their sexuality. Oh yeah, no, like the entire thing is well written as far as like, let's get all the hypocrisy in at once, and also have what so far has been a fairly saintly character have to deal with, honestly, a breaking point. Yeah, and he gets his ass beat because of it. Yes, he does. Because he pulls out his gun and shoots around them. Yeah, because he's drunk, and also he doesn't actually want to hurt anybody. Yeah. Well, it's also a funny bit, too, because the shitty pastor, or priest, whatever the fuck they are. Priest. He's like, wasn't he Buddhist? It's like, not all Buddhists are the same. Like like not all Catholics are the same, man. Exactly. But it's also his tipping point to call him out on the other priest on how, like, disassociated from the flock he is. Almost like if maybe it wouldn't have come to this if you were a better priest than I was. Yeah. Or as involved as I was compared to, I have to solve all of your problems. I like his line of like, why the fuck are you even a priest? You should be an accountant. You know, he has like a good point too, because like honestly, he's been in this like, 3 scenes maybe? And every time he's in it, he's just complaining about being a priest essentially. Yeah. Like all the things he's complaining about, Father is like, that's what we do. That's why we're here. Yeah. I'm sorry that you were upset that you have to preach on Sundays and help sad people. Yeah, well, it's also, we get to see the aftermath of it too. It's not something that we're waiting on, because he wakes up on Saturday and the other guy's leaving. He's like, you're right. I had my doubts too. He's like, I was drunk. He's like, no. The venom in your words. You were truthful, and maybe think before you talk. But at the same time, his being truthful to people is what makes him a good priest. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And at the same time, like, we get from here, he goes on to the airport as well, trying to escape his fate. Yeah. This is also the first and only time we see him without his priest collar. Trying to get away from it. Yep, this is where he thinks he's going to abandon his faith. But who should be there but the minor French character, the French woman's husband, or the Frenchman's wife? I don't think she was French. Yeah. No, she wasn't French. I think she was Irish. Her husband was husband was French. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, the widow is there. Yeah. But it's a good reworking of the bringing in a minor character where, again, it shows the cleverness in the writing where even though she was a minor character, and to her, he probably was a minor character in her story,
Sure.
but he had a huge impact the same way she's going to have that impact of like, hey, you kind of saved me a little bit.
Yeah.
And so this is his like, okay, well, I'm needed. I have to face it.
I also appreciate how the movie really harps on this. It's for the movie a hard line between acting on and just being tempted.
Mm-hmm.
Because he is tempted to leave. He could have still left even after their discussion with the widow.
I mean, he was on the stairs up to the plane.
And you know, it's there is no shame in a last minute change of mind.
No.
To continue on being the saintly person that he is.
Yeah. And come back later and it's maybe resolved, maybe the guy's cooled down a little bit.
Exactly.
But I think it's showing the death of the Frenchman that death comes for everyone.
True.
And maybe his death will give peace to this person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which, we'll get to that just in a minute because we get the last call to the daughter, which there's some very, very... This is some of the best writing in the movie. Like, it's already a well-written movie.
Yeah.
But these last little lines of... he thinks that forgiveness is a virtue, and they're not as virtues aren't as talked about as sins are nowadays.
And it's a really good balance because it is something that the movie has done such a good job of like writing up. Like we have spent this whole week with him, shadowing him around, and only having people talk about their sins to him. And no one has talked about how, like, with the exception of this now one woman who talked about the virtue of his kindness to her in her time of need. And he's like, boy, I sure wish other people would at least mention it every once in a while.
Well, I think it's interesting too because it doesn't follow the whole, oh, God is good. Like the movie is nothing about God at all.
No, it is just about Father James.
Well, and struggles with faith is what it's about too. I think that's what makes it so much more compelling is because we also see him throw away his gun too. Yeah,
he's made up his mind.
Mm-hmm. And Fitzgerald also shows up, finally admitting that he needs help. And Father James, I don't know if I don't think he's trying to be a dickhead in this scene too.
No, I don't think so.
He's like, I'll give you one last, or maybe it's his one last bit of hope of like, if I survive this, if I can save this person, then I have something to look forward to help another member of my flock who's actually coming for help.
Yeah. I also think that this is a point where you can see the pieces of James's rationale kind of fall in a little bit more. Because when he's done talking with the widow, you can kind of see him think, well, you know, maybe my death will comfort this person who's clearly struggling so much with what happened to them. And so at least that would give me some comfort and some purpose in my death, and I'd rather that than just die an old man, you know, hiding from who I am. Yeah. And then you can see as Fitzgerald comes into the picture, you can almost see the gears turning of like, well, maybe my death can also inspire some other people here. Yeah. Even if this is the harsh way of helping them, maybe it will.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. Because now it is time for the climax of the movie, the beach, which some of the best shots in this whole damn movie.
So good.
Also, kind of forget that the preacher or the altar boy from the first movie, what he does is he goes out and he paints. He doesn't skip to go drink and party. He goes to paint the beach, and he was talking about like, who are those two figures on the beach? Yeah, it's a good foreshadowing for this scene to come. Yeah, which. It's finally revealed it's Jack Brennan, the butcher. Yep. Which, obviously, now you're watching, it's like, okay, his marital issues have pushed him past, he wasn't a happy guy. Yeah. He had, probably he was having marital issues because of his molestation as a kid. Yeah, he clearly... Rape as a kid, not molestation. Yeah, he clearly has not been a happy person for a very long time. Yeah. Hey, hell, maybe going to see a psychologist would have made it better, but... We will never know, because he's made up his mind to kill a priest. No, exactly. But we also get a little bit of mystery, too, because he's like, well, who killed, why'd you have to kill my dog? He's like, I didn't kill your dog. I did hit my wife, though. You were right on that, but I didn't kill a dog. Yeah, so I do appreciate that, like, you're not, as the audience, allowed to pin all of your anger onto one character. You have to come to the fact that, like, wow, just about everyone in Father James's flock
kind of a shitty person.
Yeah. Well, even then, just like the way he confesses the beating of his wife feels a bit like his last confession to him of like, yeah, I'll admit to one thing that I did wrong, but I'm not a bad person from what you think.
Yeah, and it is interesting because, like, now that we've seen this grand scheme of things that has happened in just 1 week, he's not entirely wrong.
No, not
I mean,
at
minus the soon-to-be killing.
Yeah.
But, like, yeah, in the grand scheme of, like, everyone that we have met, every trouble that has been laid in front of Father James, you know, he has some leg to stand on, and you can almost feel that he's like, look, I know that, like, someone burned down the church, and you just talked to a psychopathic cannibal murderer. I know I'm not the worst thing you've seen. And Father James is like, I don't even have time to talk to you about how that's not the way it works.
Yeah. Well, it's also a little poetic, too, because when he does shoot him the first time, if I remember right, it maybe it's side or leg.
Yeah.
Well, either way, it still feels like the fifth wound of Christ.
Yeah.
So it's
meant to be side.
Yeah, it's got that feeling to it. But also, just the building tension that they got going for this.
Yes.
Where I think it gets a little deeper than that, too, because he's telling him, don't look at me. Again, showing that he's a coward because he doesn't want to look in the eyes of someone he's about to kill. Someone he obviously does care about, but he's already drawn the line in the sand.
I was like, he's already admitted it, and he could have not shown up.
Yeah.
He's the one who set this time and date. But
I also wonder if, like, that's maybe something that was told to him is, don't look at me, or something like that.
Yeah, maybe.
But it also, the very climax, because what it shows, too, is that he is 100% a coward, because when he does pull the trigger, he looks away.
Yes. And I think this is the part where the movie symbolically is trying to show that, like, this is where the similarities between Christ's level of compassion and Father James's are supposed to be very mirrored here. And so having someone who, instead of seeing anger and hate, or even scared in his eyes when he goes to shoot him, Father James's face gives a face of compassion and, mercy. Yeah, he's dying for the sins of the church. Exactly. And so it is such a well-shot scene, too. Like, is very symbolically shot, but not so much that it feels artsy or that you're going to miss anything. Oh, it's so artsy, but it is. But it's not in that way where like you need to already know all about like, oh, I need to know all this Catholic lore or like how like imagery would work. Like no, you get it. It's no El Topo. It is no El Topo, thank God. Yeah. But after the pastor priest dies, we get a little Donnie Darko like ending where. Really, I think what's important about this scene, too, is we're the opposite of, like, Donnie Darko, where Donnie Darko shows, like, everyone's life was heavily impacted because of his death. Everyone else in the town seems to have moved on with their life. Like, no one really cares. Teresa and Simon are happily in bed together. Dr. Hart is still a dickhead. He's putting out a cigarette on a heart. Yeah, like, there, like, some people... I think it just goes to show that, like, despite Father James's sacrifice, these small problems have not changed. No. And I do think that is a very interesting, like, symbolism that was very intentional on the director's part, because he talked about in his interview several times about how, like, the parallels between Father James and Christ were meant to be very stark, but in a more human sort of way. And he very much wanted to talk about how, like, even though, in the story Christ dying on the cross, that did not stop sin from happening. Like, not everyone in the world was suddenly happy. Things continued on fairly much the same way they had. Yeah, but it's a great use of juxtaposition, because we go from that to his daughter meeting with the killer in the prison. And it's just such a poetic and sad end, because it's not like she has the one tear. She is full on crying. Oh, she's bawling, yeah. Because it goes back to, like, the opening line of the movie. I also like it because it kind of bookends it at the end. It does. Do not despair. One of the thieves was saved. Do not presume. One of the thieves was damned. Kind of questions who was saved, who was damned. Was the butcher freed, or was his daughter damned? Or was it... the other way? I also liked... Gleason talked about how, to him, the ending, he saw it as even though Father James did die, he died passing on this level of this intense mercy and forgiveness to his daughter, and how that, to him, that was the interpretation he came away with the ending of, like, that is the true message of this sacrifice, is that you sacrifice not so that someone will be saved, but so that someone else will have the same level of compassion that you did.
Well, it also shows, it flips the roles of the confession from where when he says your death would have mattered to me, his death mattered to her, because...
Exactly. Because I don't think it ever occurred to her, because he didn't tell her.
No.
Yeah.
No, he didn't tell anyone. Because that's the other thing, is, like, the word gets around fast, his killer knew that he had a gun and everything, too.
Oh, sure, but it's one of those situations where, and we talked about it earlier, how this movie does a great job of very much showing that everyone brings their problems to him, but at no point did anyone ask, how are you doing?
No.
Not even his own daughter. And he could have very easily walked up to someone and be like, I don't have time for your shit today, someone is planning to kill me. Yeah,
even when he's shit-faced drunk, it's not like...
Yeah, he's not even then, bringing his problems to them necessarily.
Yeah, or them caring of, like, this is out of character for you a little bit. Well, I don't think we've seen you this shit-faced in a long time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it's just a beautiful end to the movie, because then it's just silence, and then when the credits do show up, I like this use of post-credits. It's not even post-credit scenes. All the stills that it fades in and out are scenes that he and his daughter were involved in. Yeah. It's kind of a way of, like, these places, the memories will fade, because of, like, she brings it up in, when he's talking, or, she brings it up when they're in his room, and she's like, you don't even have photos of Mom. Well, memories can fade. Yeah. The place doesn't change, but the memories of the place do.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, it's... Calvary, like, is surprisingly an intense movie for, like, as comedic as it is at times.
It does a really nice job of balancing out how devastating, honestly, the majority of this movie is, with just enough humor so that you can get to the end of it.
Yeah, well, and I think part of it, too, is that unlike the more American examples we've explored and the one Russian example, I think this falls more in line with Stalker than the other two.
Sure. I think that has to do heavily with the reliance on Catholicism, though.
Yeah, but also it's not as... I wouldn't say it's as cryptically symbolic. It's very open about it, but it also doesn't give you an answer.
I appreciate that, too. Yeah. Because, and I also appreciate that it is not a call to arms. No. I mean, it shows what the movie is hoping, which is that the world will have more compassion and mercy and forgiveness in it. But it is not a call to arms like God is Dead is.
No, exactly. Or, because even at the same extent, Stalker has similarities to God's Not Dead, where Stalker at times was a bit of a call to arms, especially at the end of, like, the world's a godless place. We got to have more faithful people. Yeah. Whereas this one is just like, maybe it's not the church that matters, but our actions that matter.
True. I also think that this is one of the more interesting religious-based films that we've covered, because while the whole thing is set in heavily religious theming, the end goal of the movie is not a call to religion. No. It is a call to compassion, which is a very different end game than I think any of the other ones, with maybe the minus Monty Python, which really wasn't a call to anything, other than maybe silliness. But...
Well, and the end is also a bit of a parallel, like the scene with him and the serial killer, where do you think that she forgave him?
Yes, I do. I agree with Gleason there, where his interpretation of this immense ability to forgive was passed on to his daughter. That's what I want to believe. Okay. I like his interpretation too of, like, the hope that maybe that level of compassion will have impacted his church, his flock, so that way, even though we saw them kind of continuing on with what they were doing, that maybe now, instead of just relying so heavily on the sin aspect of it, they will, try a little bit. Because it even doesn't take much. It just takes a little bit of forgiveness, a little bit of try to make a difference. And so I do agree with Gleason, that is what I want to see, honestly. Like, it's not a hard thing, because there is no words to say that there was. You were just interpreting what you saw in a facial expression in a very quick scene.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm a little torn because...
It would be hard to do. It would be so hard to do, to not only know that your dad did not tell you. Mm-hmm. Especially after, honestly, what for her probably felt like a really successful bonding trip. Yeah. Like, they've clearly been estranged for a long time. It seems like she has come to visit him before, and they really haven't gotten anywhere. Mm-hmm. And, like, finally, she's, you know, they've made progress. Like, he's finally opened up to her and not just been a pastor or a priest. He's finally acted more like her father. Yeah, especially with that final phone call, too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that final phone call is essentially his suicide note to her. How devastating. Yeah, and it's not like something you could have, like, written down. It's just memories of a word, which I think is also poetic in its own way, too, where... And I mean, it fits with him so well. Yeah, there's not photos to remember him by. That's why all the places that they were together are empty. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I think it's one that I'm still going to struggle with figuring out whether she does or not. Sure. I mean, it is very difficult. Well, because I also think, I know I'm a little more cynical on my side, where, and maybe from my point of view, I don't think I could get to that far of forgiving, maybe more so accepting that this is reality. Mm-hmm. But I think that hopefulness is there, and that's probably the best takeaway to have from that movie, is that maybe you can forgive some of this horrible stuff. Or even just having the hope that forgiveness could happen, yes. I think is a great takeaway from the movie. Yeah, no, I agree. I don't know, I'm honestly so glad Actuality showed me this or recommended this movie to me, because I had no clue what I was going into. He's recommended so many banger of movies. He's the guy who got me to watch this and Uncle Buck. Ah, yes. Yeah. Some solid choices. I will say, this is not my first McDonough? I'm not sure. This is not my first film with him. I was first introduced with his movie right before this one, which was The Guard, and I was blown away by it. It's part of the reason why I agreed to watch the Calvary with my artsy friend in the first place. And so I think if you like this movie, I do think you will enjoy his other works. Granted, I've not seen every single one. However, he does not have a long list. Yeah. But from The Guard, I think you will enjoy Calvary. Okay. Or the other way around. So, in talking of ratings, Chris, good, bad, weird. For me, this is just good. This movie's stellar. I'm really glad we revisited it. Even though I had seen it before, I honestly had forgotten I'd seen it. And that's not saying that, like, this movie's forgettable. It just came out so long ago, and I'd seen so many other things since then. And honestly, this isn't one that people talk about, which is a little sad, because this movie's great. Yeah, this movie is fantastic. I'm giving it a solid good rating, too. I mean, there's nothing weird or bad about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bitch about a couple little things here and there, but they're minor. This movie just, I think, even more so than Stalker, because I love Stalker. I think Stalker is a great movie. I would rather watch Calvary because I think it's more compelling. It is very compelling. And its open-endedness has answers, but it's not like, oh, here's 20 other answers it could be. It's like, you got a couple answers, but it's up to you to make of what it is. I totally agree. I also think that, like, this is a great jumping off point for a lot of these actors and the director. Like I said, if you liked this one, you're probably going to like his other works based off of the ones I've seen. If you like the performance by Gleason, he is in so many other things and he's always a delight. Same thing with a lot of the other cast in this. Like, everyone in this, I have either accidentally seen them in other stuff, saw them in this, and I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to make a list. I need to watch more of their stuff. Or I've seen them in other stuff, and every time I've seen them, I've had a great time. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. So do you recommend Calvary, Chris? I do, and I'm kind of surprised that this movie hasn't made its rounds as much as I thought. Mm-hmm. Again, came out in 2014, and I get it was an indie film, and it wasn't as heavily promoted here as it was in the UK. From what I understand, it did fairly well in the UK and in Ireland. But I think here it would, like, people would really enjoy this. It's a very good movie. I'm very much in the highly recommended. I'm making my parents watch this movie the next time they're in town. 100%. But I don't think it would have done as well stateside outside of, like, the art house community, because
from our exploration of a lot of religious films is this movie doesn't fully like confirm that belief system. It's more so like it's a companion piece to something else, I'd say.
The reason why I say this would do well is because it's not a quote-unquote Christian media piece. Mm-hmm. Christian media tends to, unfortunately, exclude Catholicism to a large extent, but also because this doesn't really touch on the same points. However, I do not think it would be outside of that community's wheelhouse.
No.
Would it be something that I think everyone would be busting down the doors to watch? Of course not. However, I've seen Passion of the Christ. I know what they're willing to watch. This movie's not outside of it.
No, I can see that too, but I think part of it too is certain sects of that would not be comfortable with many of these subjects explored.
I agree, but I think the general American audience would really enjoy this. I think it explores things in a really delicate way, and if you were part of the community that had to deal with a lot of the problems or remember the problems around the time period this movie is set, it will ring a lot more bells, but it's not necessary to enjoy this movie. No. You can totally have a great time watching it and getting all of the themes and all of the understanding, even if you don't remember these topics.
Yeah, no, I get it. So now it's the time for the 3 Degrees of Takashimike, our final one of year 5. I'm looking forward to next month.
I was gonna say, you've already won, but to round out the season, let's hear how you managed to tie. Honestly, I'm gonna be very impressed, because this was a very heavy UK and Irish-based cast and crew.
Oh, I got this real good.
Okay.
And thematically, I think it's the best one I've found yet.
Oh boy.
I went with Brendan Gleeson, who was in Kingdom of Haven with Nikolaj Coster-Waldau. Mm-hmm. He was in Filthy Gorgeous with Soji Arai, who was in Big Bang Love Juvenile A, a film about violent salvation, murder, detective work, and a child being raped/molested. And the only thing it lacks is the religious aspect.
Okay, well.
And it is surprisingly more artfully shot than you think it would be.
The title does not lead me to believe that, but I am impressed that you managed to make it here.
I'll lend you it. I think you'll appreciate this one.
We need to work on your sales tactic, but I trust you.
No, it's actually a really good movie. I think... this probably would have been a good one to do too, because I think it's one of Miike's lesser talked films, but...
Well, I mean, eventually we will get our way through all his works, I'm sure.
Yeah, but did I tell you I'd end the last one with a bang?
You sure did. I'm very impressed that you managed to, honestly... You surprised me each time. You did great this season.
Yeah, I only missed 2 movies, or two movies I couldn't connect.
Honestly, pretty impressive for some of the more odd ones we did.
Yeah, but next year we do have another game plan, so look forward to that.
Ooh.
We're hopefully gonna get some, or you guys better participate, because we're planning for some audience participation. There'll be fun stuff for it. So
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, but anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace. Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.